This is CBC Vancouver News.
It was 3.25 years of unbelievable trauma for me and my family.
Thousands of lives cut short.
All these people have lost loved ones, and it's sad.
6 more people in BC killed by the end of today.
I always encourage people to not use alone.
On International Overdose Awareness Day, the push to save more lives and ask hard questions. A man who pleaded guilty in a deadly stabbing spree in North Vancouver 2 years ago has now been sentenced.
I'm hearing from British Columbians every day that are being crushed by the costs of daily life.
And provincial plea. BC's Premier asks the Bank of Canada to not raise interest rates again. Good evening, I'm Dan Burritt. Thanks for joining us. 7 years ago, BC declared the toxic drug crisis a public health emergency. 7 years of loss, grinding pain, and frustrations. And that toll keeps climbing. Today is International Overdose Awareness Day. Since 2016, 12,000 people have been killed by poison drugs in this province. Iron-cold numbers that are lost loved ones for countless families. Benit Brage begins our coverage with the scale of the crisis being felt across BC.
The human toll of BC's overdose crisis is heavy. More than 12,700 lives lost since 2016.
And I miss my son. I want people to remember that he's not a number, that nobody is a number. He had a wonderful, big smile. He was warm and kind.
Shirley Wilson says she lost her 24-year-old son, Jacob, to an accidental fentanyl overdose 2 years ago.
Jacob never wanted to be an addict. Jacob wanted to be released from pain.
Jacob was run over by a pickup truck in 2018 and ended up with a cracked skull and brain bleeds. Wilson says he did have drugs in his system that night.
He had fentanyl, he had cocaine, he had cannabis, and he had alcohol, a high alcohol level.
But she says the injuries led him to more drug use and psychosis. She says her son desperately wanted to overcome addiction, but struggled to get the support he needed, from mental health counseling to hospital care. She says he was discharged twice from the Abbotsford Hospital 48 hours before he died by an overdose. Fraser Health says it can't comment on individual cases. The health authority points out that under BC's Mental Health Act, staff can't force a patient into treatment and must respect their right to freedom. The BC coroner says an investigation of the death is still underway.
It was 3.25 years of unbelievable trauma for me and my family. Alone. Much of it was alone.
Wilson, who is also a school trustee in Abbotsford, is committed to stopping the stigma.
It can happen to anyone. It happened to us. It can happen to anyone. It doesn't matter about the parental upbringing.
This year, the highest number of deaths happened in urban centres like Vancouver, Surrey, and Greater Victoria. But from big cities to small, the crisis has no boundaries. So, Polly, what is the human toll of this crisis in Cranbrook?
Now at supper time, people are talking about who else is lost. And I don't think there's any household in Cranbrook that doesn't know about what's going on, or someone that has lost somebody.
The drugs are becoming more toxic, leading to more overdoses. She says about 50 people have died since 2016 in Cranbrook, and more support is needed.
People are exhausted. I can't say enough that the province needs to include people with lived and living experience at the policy changing tables around safe supply, drug checking.
The province says it's working on vital solutions to help save lives, from expanding treatment with more substance use beds to increasing access to more medication-assisted treatments and adding more community counseling services across BC. Changes that for some are coming too late. Over the last 4 months, CBC News has spoken with the families of 35 people who have lost their lives to overdose, families sharing who their loved ones were and what they were loved for in these obituaries at cbcnews.ca/BC. Each fading light is a reflection of the many lives this crisis has taken. Benit Brage, CBC News, Vancouver.
International Overdose Awareness Day is seen as a day to remember, to recognize, and reflect. But as Yasmin Gandam reports, the emotions are also prompting action.
I feel sad.
Debbie Cleveland lost her son to a drug overdose 15 years ago, but for her, it feels like just yesterday.
You know, and I look at these and think, all these people have lost loved ones. And it's sad. It's wasteful. And it shouldn't be happening. You know, if we put some of the resources into securing safe drug supplies that we've put into fighting COVID, this epidemic would be under control.
She is not alone. Many mothers gathered to release purple balloons in the sky and place locks on a heart-shaped fence in their children's memory, raising their voices for all parents who have lost a child to a drug overdose.
There was no help, right? He was in and out of different recoveries looking for help, but we didn't know what that model was. Do you know what I mean? What I've learned in the last 3 years has been amazing, and I was very informed. You know, those drugs, I knew his drug use. We were trying to get help together. COVID was a game changer. We could not get help, right? He died actually in a hospital trying to receive help.
This comes as BC set a new record. 198 people died from toxic drugs in July alone. In the first 7 months of this year, 1,455 deaths were recorded, the most since the overdose crisis was declared in 2016. Even with decriminalization and safe supply pilot projects, the numbers continue to rise. Advocates say it's not enough, that more needs to be done.
People are surviving through this, and we need to expand that program because we need a clean supply of drugs. That is the only answer to the crisis right now, and that's what we continue the fight today for.
Hundreds marched through the downtown east side advocating for a safer supply and remembering those lost to an overdose. Yasmin Gandam, CBC News, Vancouver.
Acom is a tight-knit First Nations community in the BC Kootenays. They also mark the day, but admit they struggled to figure out how best to do that.
We have had a certain number of overdoses in the community where we've lost people this past year, and so I think that a lot of people in the community were just wanting that opportunity to be able to come together and recognize that. You know, it is something that we're dealing with in kind of a big way here in the community.
They held a vigil this afternoon where people were encouraged to share about their loved ones. He says the Acom community alone lost 9 people to poison drugs since December. A report from the First Nations Health Authority reveals toxic drugs are killing First Nations people at nearly 6 times the average rate in BC. The staggering number of deaths show the scale of what's unfolding across our province. The unrelenting crisis continues to cause pain for many, as we see, and underscore the magnitude of the epidemic. Lindsay Duncombe continues our coverage with more on how some are trying to end the stigma.
Open up your eye for me. I need you to open your eye. Wake up.
This is how Christina Selby Brown processes grief, teaching people how to reverse an overdose with the drug naloxone. Her father and brother died after using toxic drugs.
I believe there's a collective grief. It's very complicated, so I believe that people collectively, because of that collective grief, are just basically wanting to do what they can.
Sasha Bosovic-Illick lives in downtown Vancouver and sees people struggling every day. She's here to learn how to help them.
As an individual, I've had to call 911 a couple of times, seeing people on the streets, and it's been really difficult for me because I don't actually know when to intervene.
Across British Columbia on this Overdose Awareness Day, people gathered to remember the dead. On average, 6 people die here every day because of toxic drugs, the epicenter of a crisis that is increasingly national. There were moments of mourning today on the prairies, the Maritimes, the nation's capital.
I was using in my own home and I overdosed. And luckily I pulled out. I don't know how long I was out. I have no knowledge of any of that, but I survived.
The overarching question, how to stop the death. This year, BC decriminalized small amounts of hard drugs to reduce stigma and is allowing some safe supply, prescription opioids, so people won't use unregulated and often deadly street drugs. Policies that have been simultaneously criticized for not going far enough and for making the problem worse.
It's probably one of the most complicated problems that government is dealing with, our government, any government across the country.
The BC government says more than 1,000 lives were saved last year because of naloxone. Organizers are planning for a bigger event like this next year, a sign no one expects the need to save lives to go away anytime soon. Lindsay Duncombe, CBC News, New Westminster.
The man behind a deadly stabbing spree outside a library in North Vancouver 2 years ago has now been handed a life sentence. The mass stabbing traumatized the community in March 2021. A woman was killed and 6 others hurt. Yannick Bandaugo pleaded guilty to several charges, including second-degree murder. Last month, the 30-year-old told court of a troubled childhood that led him to use drugs. Today, he was sentenced to life in prison with no chance of parole for 15 years. A judge described his actions as monstrous. The BC government has extended a province-wide state of emergency for another 2 weeks with more than 400 wildfires burning. As Yvette Brent reports, there's a risk for new fires and worsening conditions for the ones already burning.
The BC government has extended a province-wide state of emergency for at least another 2 weeks. Emergency Management Minister Bowen Ma says this is necessary because of 422 fires that continue to burn in the province. They are burning near Kelowna, the Shuswap region, and in another cluster in the northeastern corner of the province. Rain and cooler temperatures have helped the situation, but the threat continues.
The rain provided our firefighters a chance to breathe, but we are still far from being in the clear. Wildfire activity has been exacerbated by the severe drought that we're experiencing across the province.
80% of BC remains at a level 4 or 5 drought, with 5 being the highest. Bruce Ralston, the Minister of Forests, had this to say about the drought situation in the province.
Significant rainfall doesn't typically come until the fall, meaning we can anticipate drought conditions to persist in the province for the next while. It is a serious situation.
More than 4,000 British Columbians remain on evacuation order, and more than 65,000 remain on alert, ready to leave their homes at any moment. That's left schools in the fire zones and families in a state of flux, with some people camping in parking lots for weeks now, unable to return home, in some cases not having homes. The state of emergency allows the province certain powers. Those powers include the ability to restrict travel and even commandeer personal property to try to fight in the disaster situation. BC has used its current state of emergency to ban non-essential overnight stays in several communities in the interior, intending to free up space for evacuees who have nowhere to stay. The current declaration will expire on September the 14th. Yvette Brent, CBC News, Vancouver.
2 weeks later, some West Kelowna residents are getting a chance to go home and get a first look at the damage.
It was surprising because I never thought my house could look like that, right? Because I could see through the house. And I was just wondering, like, where did the tables go? Where did the cupboards go? Where's the washer and dryer? There's nothing. It's gone.
That's my house.
Bus tours are being organized for locals whose homes were wiped out. The Regional Emergency Operations Center says it's doing this to make sure those people have the privacy, time, and space to be the first one to see their properties. One of the Okanagan's busiest summer highways will be shut down through this long weekend because of a rock slide. The closure means people won't be able to travel between Kelowna and Penticton, likely for several more days. Highway 97 is shut down in both directions as crews check the risk of another rock fall. That stretch of highway is expected to be closed through the Labor Day long weekend. Officials suggest drivers use alternate routes like Highways 97C, 5A, Highway 3, and 33. 2 forest service roads are also available, but crews say you need extra supplies, fuel, and it's best to travel during the day. On Vancouver Island, better news. Highway 4 east of Port Alberni has reopened in both directions. It was partly closed in June after a wildfire destabilized steep slopes near Cameron Lake. That detour will stay open, but signs and checkpoints will come down. If you're planning to take a ferry this Labor Day long weekend but haven't yet reserved a spot, good luck.
If you don't have a reservations, we're encouraging people to find alternate ways to get on board, take transit, carpool, get dropped off and walk on. Essentially, if you don't have a reservation, you will find it a very challenging experience.
BC Ferries is expecting up to 500,000 passengers and some 200,000 vehicles over this long weekend. It's bringing in parking attendants and a virtual waiting room on the website to prevent technical failures. Police liaison officers are going to be back in Vancouver schools this September.
The program was reimagined, listening and leaning into a lot of the voices and concerns. I mentioned earlier the MOU shares a lot of those details, but it's important to all of us that if somebody does have a concern, reaching out to those school staff. That's part of their job every single day to support students in schools.
The board is working with the police department on this program. The board says the officers will once again be stationed inside schools across the city to support students and families and beef up school safety. The program was axed 2 years ago after some students of color said they didn't feel safe with armed police officers nearby. But a new elected school board reinstated the program in November with 15 officers on deck. The VPD says they'll have more informal uniforms, unmarked cars, and smaller guns.
I'm hearing from British Columbians every day that are being crushed by the costs of daily life.
BC's Premier pens a letter to the Governor of the Bank of Canada with a plea: no more interest rate hikes. What difference will it make? That's next. And hello to everyone watching our commercial-free live stream. Thanks for being here. On Prince Edward Island, recent rain did not dampen the spirits of an annual gathering of the Lennox Island First Nation Maui Omi, a space to share stories, traditions, and culture, and people came from near and far.
I've been dancing since I was a little boy. I'm from Littleback River in Manitoba Bay. So for many years we would dance. We were a remote community. We didn't have regalia or fancy stuff like that, but the drum would move us. I'm a 60s scoop. So at the age of 11, I was apprehended and taken out of culture. So I grew up not knowing anything more about my culture, lost my family, lost my community, lost my language. And I was reunited when I was 28. And slowly I got reunited with culture. And now it's so important to me. You know, I had to give this up, not by choice as a little boy, but I will never give it up again.
Today is all about celebration, right? And it's about teaching too. Like Maui Omi is like, we have these because it's so important that we continue to do these kind of things so the children will always learn and continue on traditions. And you know, that's what it's all about.
You know, you become family and then you just, friendships, you know, it just keeps on growing and growing. So, and then just always wanting to encourage others to continue dancing and to be that support for each other.
We have young people here who have traveled on their own. They're adolescents or early adults, and they come and they sit with us because they feel safe and comfortable, because they trust and they know and they believe in us, and we can look after them. And they look after us too. So we are family.
I want people to help us to ensure that this is here in 100 years. That's why it's important. We need this to continue.
This is who I am. It defines who I am. It's part of my healing journey. We just dance for children of residential schools, 60 Scoop, and those who have made it. Well, I was one of those. My mother was one of those. So I dance for her, but I also dance for the young ones. They're our future. They don't ever have to go through what we went through when we were little.
BC's Premier has issued a public plea about interest rates. David Eby has written to the Governor of the Bank of Canada requesting a pause on another round of hikes. The central bank is set to make its next interest rate decision next Wednesday. Mira Baines looks into how much of an impact Eby's letter might have.
A move to help parents with childcare costs up to $145 per month is another made in BC solution to financial pressures facing people, says BC's Premier. Premier David Eby took aim at the Bank of Canada in a letter ahead of its announcement on whether to raise key interest rates again.
Now, I'm hearing from British Columbians every day that are being crushed by the costs of daily life. And one of those big impacts that they're seeing is ever escalating interest rates.
In the letter, Eby says people in BC are already hurting. In your role as governor, I urge you to consider the full human impact of rate increases and not further increase rates at this time. Eby also wrote to Prime Minister Justin Trudeau, pushing the federal government to target inflation by focusing on housing and infrastructure. The Bank of Canada says it has no comment as it's in a blackout period ahead of the next interest rate decision on Wednesday. Already, some economists have suggested central banks have gone too far with rate hikes.
I think it'd be prudent to kind of hold off, keep rates where they are until we're sure that inflation is coming down, but no need to raise them any further.
But when it comes to the message from the Premier, it may be geared to British Columbians as much as it is to the Bank of Canada.
We are seeing Mr. Eby perhaps move a little bit more into a kind of retail politics mode of trying to speak the language of British Columbians who are feeling the economic pinch.
There's skepticism the Premier's message won't make much of a difference.
A lot of the people that I know also living BC and living Vancouver especially, to find a place more affordable.
As smart as David Eby may be or not, he's not going to determine what's going to happen with Bank of Canada interest rates.
Now it's a waiting game on what the Bank of Canada will do next. Mira Baines, CBC News, Vancouver.
There it is, an almost full moon tonight. Thank goodness the clouds disappeared. This is after the blue moon put on quite a show across the globe. Fortunately, we couldn't see it here until tonight. Darius Madavi will have your BC-wide weather forecast right after this.
Students in British Columbia will see changes when they go back to school on Tuesday, and they may not like some of them. All summer, officials in Victoria have been working hard at cutting $80 million out of the school budget. Jerry Thompson reports on what some of the results will be.
Budget cuts will put students who need special help into regular classrooms with everyone else. Individual attention will become a luxury. To complicate matters, about 50% of students in Vancouver don't speak English when they enter the school system.
The federal government opened the floodgates and let an awful lot of non-English speaking people into the country. Many of these people came to the greater Vancouver area and specifically into Vancouver, and that caused a hell of a burden on the Vancouver school system. We had to expand our programs, hire many specialty teachers, teaching very small classes to meet the needs of this particular portion of the population.
Today, the teacher faces not only a larger class, but in that class, they're likely to have a student who speaks English as a second language. They may well have a blind student, a student who is hearing impaired, a student who has severe emotional difficulties. Any one of those students may be there who 10 years ago was in a special institution.
Keane agrees that children with special problems should be part of the mainstream, but
it's going to hurt the general student because the teacher is going to have to pay extra attention to the child with special needs, and the other children are simply going to get less attention.
So the Teachers Federation feels that this could be the worst school year ever, with overcrowded classes and teacher morale about as low as it could get. But more conservative people have a different point of view. They feel that the cutbacks were long overdue, and some school trustees even think that the quality of education may improve despite the cutbacks. Jerry Thompson, CBC News, Vancouver.
And that's the National for this Saturday night, the 3rd of September. For CBC News, I'm Peter Mansbridge. Good night.
Hi, I'm Amy Bell, and here's what's in your CBC Vancouver inbox.
On September 16th, join CBC Vancouver at the second annual Come Toward the Fire, a free outdoor festival celebrating Indigenous community, culture, and creativity. Visit cometowardthefire.com. And September is Literacy Month. Have fun and support the cause by joining CBC Vancouver's Dan Burritt at Dakota's Team Trivia Challenge on September 27th. For tickets, register at dakota.ca.
The weather update is brought to you by Direct Buy Furnace. To cool and clean the air in your home, call Direct Buy Furnace. Installing Trane, the most reliable heating and cooling brand.
Climate specialist and scientist Darius Mahdavi is here with our BC-wide weather forecast. We've had some rain across our province, Darius. What impact is that really having on drought, wildfires, etc.?
Well, looking at the drought map that the province released today, it does seem to have some impact, especially in the central parts of the province, the northern Columbias, but I don't want to overstate the impact this has had. We're still in a very dangerous drought situation. So if you're going out this long weekend, please just be careful. In the summer months, most fires are started by lightning, but in the shoulder season, it is mostly human-caused fires that are an issue. So just be cautious. We're still in a dangerous drought and fire situation. Here on this satellite and radar map, you can see some of that rain coming up through the Kamloops and Shuswap area. So some good news there. It doesn't seem to have quite made too much, made it to Kelowna, or at least in any significant amount. But we've seen those low temperatures for the last few days sticking around today. Tomorrow, those will start to come up as we get a new high pressure system set up over the province. So we've got a couple days of dry weather ahead. Coming with this high pressure system, we're also seeing outflow conditions because of high pressure in the interior, low pressure over the Pacific. So that's smoke coming out to us on the coast. So be ready for a couple smoky days, Friday and Saturday. But it is also staying dry. A bit of rain tomorrow for the Kootenays and Columbias still, but heading into Friday or most of Friday and Saturday, pretty dry across the province. Sunday, we get another burst of moisture, but it's not going to last too long. So for tomorrow, expect that clearing pattern. Clouds clearing up, heading further north you go in the province. This will clear up Williams Lake, Prince George. Those will see sunnier days, probably late Friday into Saturday. Clearing pattern is really what we're looking at. And here in Vancouver, it's a similar story. Pretty dry Friday and Saturday. Clouds clearing up for tomorrow, returning a little bit on Saturday. And then we have some rain coming in on Sunday, more than likely. Monday, Tuesday, Wednesday, chance of rain, but don't count on it each of these days. Just a very low chance. So maybe a bit of moisture, but don't expect too much.
We will watch for it. Thanks very much, Darius.
Thank you.
And that is your late news for Thursday. Thank you for joining us tonight. For news anytime, check our website, cbc.ca/BC. Your next local news is on the early edition on CBC Radio 1. That starts tomorrow morning at 5:30. I will see you next Tuesday, so enjoy the Labor Day long weekend. Stay safe. Good night. Moon